chapter 4. And so the first scripture lesson was from Exodus, and that was at the end of all of the going before Pharaoh. That was the last of the plagues, I guess you could say, where the firstborn was killed. Pharaoh the next day said, "Get out, take everything that you got, get out of my country." And so they left. And of course, as we know, he came after them. And then God delivered them in a great, amazing deliverance when they walked across the dry ground, when the Red Sea was parted. And but then again, after that, they lost faith, they forgot. And then Father sent them out into the desert for, how many years were they out there? You remember? Somebody knows. 40 years, that's right. I knew you knew it. And they were out in the desert for 40 years, and then Moses died, Joshua took over, and then they're heading into the promised land. Joshua's the one that's to lead them. We come to chapter 4, and this is when they came to the Jordan River, and it was at flood stage, and they needed to get across. And again, the Lord said, "Take a step into the water, then I'll stop the flow." He told them that you had to take a step of faith before the flow would cease. And so where we pick up this account in chapter 4 is they've already gone across the dry ground, or they're heading across. And it says, when the whole nation, starting at verse 1, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests stood, and to carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you in the future." Again, here's that statement that was before. In the future, when your children ask you, "What do these stones mean?" tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And these stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. I'm going to stop reading there. But a memorial to the people. Memory. That's kind of what we're talking about this morning. What does this mean, memory? I came across a story I just have to tell you. There was a university football coach. His name was Forrest Gregg. And he was sitting at his desk one day, and he was going over his roster, when all of a sudden the room got really dark. And it was caused because this huge young man was standing in the doorway of his office, and he had blocked out the sun completely. He was so big. And Coach Gregg asked the young man what he wanted. And this hulk of a boy, he said, "I want to play football, Coach." And so Coach Gregg's eyes, he lit up, because this was a guy that could play defense. He could, be an asset to the team. And he asked the young man to come into his office and take a seat. With excitement in his eyes, he thought about the line of having this barn-sized, bulky boy at the, as part of the field. He got out his papers and he asked the young man a few questions. He said, "How old are you?" And the young man started to count on his fingers. 19 years old, Coach, 19 years old. And the coach looked at him a minute and he said, "Oh, okay." And he asked, "How tall are you?" The young man stood up and he took his hand and he measured up his leg, taking his hand up his leg, up his head, and he counted his fingers. And then he said, "I'm 6 feet 8 inches tall, Coach. I'm 6 feet 8 inches tall." And again, the coach gave him a funny look and he wrote down the answer and he asked, "Okay, what's your name?" And this time the young man paused, dazed off into space, and he was nodding his head. "Charlie. Charlie's my name." Well, that was too much for the coach to think of. He said, "All right, Charlie, I can understand counting on your fingers for your age. I can understand, using your hands to measure how tall you are. But what was all the nodding of your head and when I asked you about your name? And he said, "Oh, that's simple, Coach." He said, "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Charlie." That's my name. Happy birthday to Charlie. Yeah. Charlie had a pretty poor memory, but he wanted to play football. Sometimes we have some pretty poor memories as well. That's why we need to remember. That's why we need to remember. We need to remember the way that God worked in the days of the Bible. But we need to remember as well that God still works today. He still helps us today to face the challenges that each day brings. Today's the Sunday before Remembrance Day, and so we're going to be looking back, or we're going to be looking at memory and how it plays into our faith. You see, Moses understood the fact of memory and how it affects us, how it affects our daily living. That's why it says, "And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean?" Well, then you're supposed to tell them. You tell them. When you remember, or when you go through the ritual of Passover, that's you remembering the amazing deliverance that God did. And in the same way with Joshua, said, "When your children ask you, what do these stones do?" Well, then you are to tell them. You're to tell them. We all have stories in our lives. Sometimes we forget the stories of how God has worked in our lives. Sometimes we remember, we forget different things. This morning, as I was getting dressed, as I shared with the kids, I put on different things, and I'm thinking, "Oh yeah, that's what my brother gave me. Oh yeah, this is the jacket that I got when my dad died." How much of the stuff that you have around your house are things that help you remember someone or something, or an event that was special in your life? Has anyone ever asked you the question, "What does this mean?" Or "Where did you get that?" And then you're able to tell them the story. And then sometimes you even think, "Oh, I forgot all about that." Or when you're telling the story, you remember a little tidbit of something that kind of comes to your mind. We all have those sort of things where we keep memories. We love to take pictures. And today, you can take a video. At one time, you had to have one of those big bulky cameras that had the big tapes in them. They were called VHS tapes, if you remember that far back. Well, today, that camera right there is recording me. You might not know that, but I'm on YouTube because of that camera. And that camera can record up to 30 minutes of video. And then you can upload it onto your computer and upload it onto the net. We have pictures, we have souvenirs from trips. I sometimes have a hard time remembering where we got things or who gave them to me. And I remember before I left Chester Basin, there was a lady that came to the door. Her name is Agnes Clinton. And she said, "Oh, that's such a beautiful tie that you have on." I don't have it on this morning, but it was a tie with butterflies on it. She says, and I think, "Tracy, you were standing beside me." And I said, "Oh, I can't remember where I got that tie." And Tracy said, "It was Agnes who gave you that tie." Red face, Sometimes I have a hard time remembering where I got things. But Tracy has a great memory for some of these things. But anyway, we remember things. We all have things that remind us of people, of special times, of lives, times in our lives. One of the things that I like to do, that I've started to do, is keep a journal. It's not a journal that I keep where I record things from every day, but it's usually a journal that I'll record things that I want to remember in days ahead. In this particular journal, I've got all kinds of great stuff. When Benjamin and I went to Toronto for our mission tour, it's in here. When I went down to Colorado for a retreat, it's in here, and some of the funny things from that. And then there's some of the things that aren't so good, like our vacation from 2010. Wasn't so good of a vacation. I'll just read to you a little bit. Just one day. We went to Newcastle. The reason why we went to Newcastle is because we need to get the back window of our car replaced, okay, because it had imploded in onto our food and everything. And Benjamin lost his iPod. I felt sick. He was mad at himself. Catherine said that she had to hold up joy for us. Now, that's something that you just wouldn't remember, right? This has been a hard camping trip. We went to the beach and all the kids had a great time. The boys were not going to swim, but they did. And when we got back, Sean and I made a campfire and everyone else went to the evening program. In a national park, there's always evening programs. And when we got back, we had some s'mores and hot dogs. It was an uneventful sleep, but we woke early. That was a good thing. That word, uneventful sleep, that was a good word. But we remember things, you know, when you write them down, then it brings back those memories. It's so that you don't forget. You know, I'm going to tell you something this morning. In 72 hours from today, what's that? Wednesday. By Wednesday, you will probably have forgotten almost everything that I've said this morning. Maybe you'll remember the joke about Charlie, but you may remember about 5% of what I've said. Think about that, 5%. But you know something? If you write down, if you listen to it, you hear about 5%, you remember about 5%. But if you write it down, then you'll remember even more. If you tell somebody about what you've heard, you'll remember even more. You know, there's ways of remembering things. But you see, what Moses was doing and Joshua was doing, what God was doing, is really what was happening when he put in place the Passover feast, when he asked them to pick up these stones and bring them and place a memorial. What God was doing was, he was saying, you need to remember this, and you need to pass it on. You need to remember how I've worked in the past, and then you need to tell others about that so that you don't forget. You see, I believe every day is a Remembrance Day, or every Sunday, I should say, is a Remembrance Day. Because when we come into church, one of the things that we do is we go back to the Word, and we read the Word. We try to figure out what it had to say back then, or what was going on back then, and then bring it to today, to apply it to our lives today, so that we can live into the future with God and for God. Here are two stories: Moses and the Passover, Joshua and the crossing of the Jordan. And one of the things that we can remember about the Passover is that then, when Jesus came, he took the Passover and made it new. And that's why we, like last week, had the Lord's Supper. Do you know why we only, in the Baptist Church, celebrate the Lord's Supper once a month? Anybody know that? Why we do that? It's so that it doesn't become so commonplace. So that it doesn't become so normal that we forget the significance of what we're doing. It's so that it doesn't, become just rote or root or whatever you want to say. It's so that it impacts us, so that it changes us. You see, when we look back, we see how God worked, how God moved among His people. And then that affects us today, and also looking into the future, looking forward. Tomorrow we're going to look back. We're going to gather at cenotaphs. We're going to remember the sacrifice that so many people made over the past century, in particular during times of war. Why do we remember? We remember how terrible it was so that it will remind us that it shouldn't happen again. So we look back so that it will impact how we live today and tomorrow. I don't know about you, but a lot of times I can look back with rose-colored glasses, and I can forget some of the pain, some of the hard times, and it reminds me that at one time you'll say, in the good old days, but you know what you're referring to were these trying times when you say the good old days, because a lot of times we look back with rose-colored glasses and we forget difficult times. And that's why I believe Remembrance Day is important, so that we look back and we ask the question, what does this mean? We put aside a day a year to remember, to remember the horror of war and the glory of those who gave their all so that they could protect our freedom. I believe we also remember in a hope, again, that it will never happen again. I wanted to read to you a poem. It's called Soldier, What Did You See? It's an interesting poem. It says, Soldier, what did you see? What did you see at war? I saw such glory and horror as I've never seen before. I saw men's hearts burned naked in red crucibles of pain, and I saw such godlike courage as I'll never see again. What did you hear, soldier? What did you hear at war? I heard the prayers on lips of men who had never prayed a prayer before. I heard men tell their very souls, confessing every dark stain, and I heard men speak the sacred things that they will not speak again. What did you eat, soldier? What did you eat at war? I ate sour bread of fear and the acidic salt of gore. My lips were burned with wine of hate and the scalding drink of Cain. My tongue has known a bitter taste I would not taste again. What did you think, soldier? What did you think at war? I thought how strange we have not learned from wars that raged before, except new ways of killing, new multiples of pain. Is all the blood that men have shed, blood shed all in vain? What did you learn, soldier? What did you learn at war? I learned that we must learn sometime what was not learned before. That victories won on battlefields are victories won in vain, unless in peace we kill the germs that breed new wars again. What did you pray, soldier? What did you pray at war? I prayed that we might do the thing that we have not done before, that we might mobilize for peace, nor mobilize in vain, lest Christ and man be forced to climb stark Calvary again. See, when Moses wrote about the children asking, what does this mean? When Joshua wrote what God told him, what does this mean? That's when we remember what God has done in the past. But we don't leave it in the past. We learn from not only the triumphs, but we learn from the mistakes as well. What was one of the mistakes that the Israelites had done when they came out of Egypt, came across the Red Sea, and then they started grumbling? Did you bring us out of Egypt so that we could die? They didn't trust God. After walking through the Red Sea, how many of us forget in our own lives the walking through the Red Sea, of how God has provided for us? And sometimes we start to grumble about, why am I in this situation right now? What's going on? We need to remember. We need to learn from our mistakes. But then we need to live into today. We need to live into today knowing that God is with us. God was with the Israelites when they came through the Red Sea. God was with the Israelites again when they came through the Jordan. God was with you when you decided to follow Christ. God was with you when you were going through those trying times. God was with you, and God is with you right now, walking with you. God is with us. God is also for us. We need to remember that He's not someone who takes joy in bringing pain and suffering. We need to remember that pain and suffering comes from what? From sin and from Satan. And that God is a good God. And God is one that walks with us, who loves us, cares for us, seeks our greatest glory, our greatest good. We need to know that He is with us, that He is for us, and that He will never, can you finish that statement? Forsake us. That He will never forsake us. That He is always there with us, never forsaking us. May we know that in the challenges that this day brings, and in the challenges, because every day brings challenges with it. Anybody have a challenge-free week? Put up your hand. I'm sure it's not happened because we went through some difficult times this week. And I always remember when our kids were young, one of the things that we used to say, Tracy and I used to say all the time, and this too shall pass. And this too shall pass. Waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning because somebody's crying, and this too shall pass. But it just changes, doesn't it? It just changes. We need to know that God is always with us, for us, and will never, what? Forsake us. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you that you are indeed a great and glorious God, that you are one that indeed helps us day by day. Help us to remember. Help us to remember how you have walked with us in the past. Help us to remember those times when we face uncertain times. Help us to know that you will never forsake us. Help us to rest in you, and help us to walk in you. We pray in Jesus' name.